Hello, welcome to Cerulean Arts Gallery. Tonight we're speaking with Ian Wagner in conjunction with his Cerulean Arts Collective Exhibition, which is on view now through October 13th. Hello, Ian.
Hey, Mike, thank
Thanks
you.
for thanks for being here tonight, of
Thanks for having me.
course. So your show just opened, and let me um, spotlight Tina's video. So tell us about your current show.
It's a little bit different from previous shows. Worked much smaller than usual. The last few shows have been, I guess the pieces were about, what, 30 inches high. These are 16 9 by 12 pieces. And it's the first time in a long time I've started out by doing drawings. Normally I just start making marks and kind of go to town and see what I can make, but it started getting a little stale, so I grabbed a stack of paper and made a bunch of sketches and picked out the ones that I felt were worth refining.
Why did you decide to go smaller?
Just for my sanity. Since this is the first time in a long time I started off with doing drawings, it was a lot more manageable to work smaller.
Mhm.
And a lot less space to cover because sometimes I can go a little overboard with too many little details that don't matter.
So this, you said you used reference drawings to,
No, everything is still just made from scratch from the gutter that I call my brain. um,
so like where does your imagery originate from? Because it's very specific. I mean, it's figures and settings and some are isolated, some are together. There's definitely an implied narrative, but
the key word is implied. There really isn't an explicit narrative. It really just to make something that looked interesting. Kind of get people to be a little bit interested and make them think that there is a narrative, make them bring something to the piece that might not necessarily be there. But one of the things I did try to do this time around is have pieces with multiple figures. I think I only have two or one of them in this show, but a lot of them with the single figures were meant to be diptychs. Um, Once I was finishing up the pieces, I was debating whether to frame them as single pieces or to frame them as diptychs in a double mat in one frame. But that kind of goes back to what you were asking about the narrative. Is there, isn't there? Well, there really isn't. It's just made to look like there is. It's all part of the show, so to speak.
'cause they have the quality of like, movies or illustration or graphic novel or something like that. So I think the
Or all,
viewers are trying hard to string them together.
or all of the above. I spend too much time watching and reading those kind of things. It just kind of seeps in.
So do you find, when we go to school and learn about art history and stuff, I mean, that's one thing, but it's also layered upon our own upbringing with TV and movies and comic books and stuff like that. How do you see those things fitting together?
The irony of it is I'm an artist that hates looking at art. Art history classes were never my favorite, but you do learn things there. But I mean, starting when I started to learn how to draw, I saw myself as becoming a comic book illustrator. And for better or worse, going through courses at the academy, I didn't necessarily see myself doing that in particular, but it still informed what I was doing. So it's always been kind of the tightrope of combining what I loved growing up, reading comic books, looking at graphic novels, watching movies, that kind of stuff, the cinematography, and combining it with the skills that I learned through classical training.
Well, we are a product of our own time. So you went to the Academy and University of the Arts?
Yes, my degrees are from the Academy, and I spent a little bit of time in the illustration program at University of the Arts, where I had the pleasure of studying with people like Tom Leonard. And at PAFA, I mean, Al Gurry was a big influence on me. I wouldn't be able to draw if it wasn't for Al. And it's always been an interesting act of combining what Al taught me and what I learned at the illustration courses at UArts. Of course, some of the illustration teachers at UArts would cry if they saw what I was doing now, because it's not necessarily illustration or up to a particular technical standard, but I prefer to work in shorthand with my figures. I think it's more interesting.
Now, speaking of technique, so how do you do these? Are you using a brush, a pen, or what?
A little bit of pen, but the majority of it is with brush. Um, the majority of the figures were done with 0 and 1 point round brushes, and the larger areas and things like hair and the shadows were done with sumi brushes. And there's a little bit of texture in the larger swaths of ink. That was a combination of paper towels and stamps, just to get a little bit
Hmm,
of a texture in there so it's not just flat.
right. Like a Roadrunner black hole.
Kind of.
Yeah.
But one of the things I did consciously do this time around with those larger abstract areas is to kind of make them antagonize the figures a little bit. I didn't want them to just be static figures with nothing really going on, but I also didn't necessarily want detailed backgrounds. So I suppose this is where the academy training comes in a little bit, and the abstract tendencies I learned there just kind of make it appealing without being overwhelming.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does, they do have like a graphic quality to them. Like this one we're looking at, the shadow, and the weight around the figure, like is very strong and structural.
God bless masking tape.
So it becomes, it's not like strictly illusionistic space. It's like a flat. I mean, it's got interesting quality to it. It's got some hint of a space, but also as an abstract shape.
I think you picked a good description when you said graphic. And a little bit of my graphic design training kind of came out in these too. How do you think make things interesting but still keep them simple?
And so do
It's
you think oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say she's kind of the odd one out in this show. She was the first of this new batch, and it took a lot of fighting to get her out of the paper.
Yeah, we see more of your underdrawing here. And so you're also combining the ink with watercolor.
I I do think better in black and white, but at the same time, that can be boring for somebody who's looking at the pieces. So, without going overboard with the color, I wanted to add a little bit of accent colors, but I wanted to make sure they weren't, there's only a few that are muted colors. I wanted to make sure that even if there was only a small accent, it was strong poppy kind of color, like his pinkish tie.
Mhm. I mean, there's kind of a retro 80s vibe here with some of the like fashion and
Yes.
the graphic quality. I mean, is that intentional?
It's intentional and just a product of what I've been looking at recently. So a
Mm.
lot of it was influenced by late 80s, early 90s graphic design, advertisements and illustrations.
Mm.
So it kind of seeps in unknowingly or knowingly.
Uh-huh. I mean, this one here's a bit different. It's a little more evocative.
I think that's the only one out of this batch that was directly inspired by a particular thing. It was inspired by a passage in a book I was reading at the time, and it was describing a woman standing on a tree in the moonlight. I just kind of ran with it.
So your influences come from like all over the place, like a steady stream of things that are passing before you, and then you dip in.
Pretty much anything but fine.
Mhm.
Uh,
Well, and the show itself has a like a very strong sense of design in terms of the size and the frame. You know, it's very consistent. I mean, we're thinking of that presentation like as you were making them.
Sort of. Um, I knew I wanted to keep everything the same size so they could all talk to each other no matter how they were arranged. And again, a lot of the pieces were kind of made in tandem to be near or next to each other. But I really went through a period of whether to debating whether to frame them singly by themselves or to frame them double matted together in one frame. And just from a presentation standpoint, I felt double matting them in a single frame was kind of pushing it too much. It didn't. I like keeping the pieces themselves simple and clean, and doing that to them would have made them a little bit more complicated than I would have been comfortable with.
And then your choice of frame itself, I think, you know, it would look very different. It was if it was a natural frame or a black frame, but you went with the white, which just sort of is there, but not doesn't draw too much attention to itself.
I wanted to keep it clean, and I don't know if expanding the paper is a good way to explain it, but I didn't want the frame to interfere with the images.
Right? It does let them sort of
Kind of float.
grow off and it doesn't scrunch them in there.
Because I did contemplate a natural frame, but considering how little color I used in them, I don't think it would have worked out nearly as well as the white frames.
No, yeah, I think it worked out well, really well.
It was kind of reassuring to finally see them all hanging because seeing them one by one as I was framing them in my studio is one thing. They looked okay in this space, but to actually see them all together, it was it was kind of a relief to see them come together like that.
Well, it is hard when you're in your own studio space and working on them, you know, individually. Then you bring them out into the public gallery space. It's a very different presentation.
True. Because
And then
having them
you're,
all taped on the wall together is much different than having them framed in the gallery.
yeah, then you're surrounded by your creation. It's always kind of a surprise when the artist comes in and sees their space. So are you satisfied?
I very it sounds funny, but this particular batch of work actually took a little bit more effort than the larger pieces that I've been doing, and it was just very nice to see them pay off like this. I was quite pleased with them as they were turning out in the studio before they were framed, but to see them all together, and even if there isn't a explicit narrative connecting all 16 of the pieces, they do talk to each other, and just kind of reassuring that I was doing the right thing as I was working through these.
Well, it looks great. Thanks so much for being here tonight, Ian.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you, Tina. Thank you both so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it immensely.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Well, thanks again and have a great night.
You too, Mike. Take care.
Bye.